My name is Elham Yabobian, and it's a pleasure for me to be here to introduce our distinguished guest of today. One of the West Los Angeles Chamber's mission is to appreciate, illustrate, and illuminate the intellectual, cultural, and literary parts of our society as a component of our social activities. In this program, on a monthly basis, the writers, thinkers, and literary activists of our community will be introduced and appreciated by our members. Our honored guest of tonight is the award winner author Michael Dedich. He was born in 1964 and spent his younger years in Queens, New York. He started writing since he was 8 years old, and after high school, he attended Northeastern University in Boston. Upon graduation, he returned to New York to begin his business career as a research analyst with Dean Wither. Later, Mike moved to Oppenheimer and has been with them since then. Michael published 2 books, The Silver Sphere and The Cistern Mission. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Mr. Michael Dedich.
Thank you. Yeah, it's about time I spoke at my local library, right? First things first. I work across the street and I live about 10 minutes away, so I think I gave them a book right when I first published. But this is one of my favorite libraries. I actually did some of the writing here in the Silver Sphere at nights, along with fantasy football drafts and some other things here, and using their knowledge that was available here. So the Silver Sphere. So I guess I should talk about how I started writing. So when I was little, I did live in Queens, and it was a busy street, and there weren't a lot of kids around, and we didn't have PlayStation, and the parks were kind of urban, so I read a lot. And my dad had a store in a place called Astoria, where he'd bring me down on the weekends, and there was a Hallmark next door. So I used to go in and buy books. And so it was kind of a little bit nerdy till I got a little bit older, and then I started doing, getting a little more athletic and stuff. But really, one thing I miss with the kids of this generation, which is why libraries are important, I spent a lot of time at the libraries as a child, is the kids aren't really reading as much now. I see my kid. He reads what the school tells him to read and does his book reports, but for pleasure, very rarely, outside of some sports articles and stuff like that. I remember at, 6, 7, 8, the first, my sister was a big reader, and she was 4 years older, so I'd usually, before I was buying them on my own, pick up from her. And I remember the first series that I really got into was the Chronicles of Narnia, which C.S. Lewis, everybody knows them now because of the movies, right? Not many people knew the Chronicle of Narnia before the movies came out. You had to be a real kind of an aficionado of science fiction and fantasy to really have read those books. They were popular, but not so mainstream as it is now. Now everybody knows, who they are. And then obviously Tolkien, and I probably read a book a week at a very young age, 7, 8, 9. And then I started writing. I started, writing some short stories. I think my first one was about some kind of, I think it was called Wolverine Mutants. It was about some Wolverines that ate some bad stuff and they attacked the town, and I must have been 8. And my mom has that at home somewhere. But then I started, at about 8 or 9 years old, I started writing the Silver Sphere, and I remember making a huge map and kind of sketching out my world. I had a finished room in the basement. I was down there for hours and I had huge pieces of OTAG, and I started just formulating my plan. And then as I continued to write, I kind of went back and forth with it. Obviously didn't do anything at that age with it. Then I eventually arrived to college, and I took a creative writing class, and that's where my seriousness to writing changed a bit. I had a professor there who's still alive and I spoke to when I published this. His name was Professor Bernstein. I took the Silver Sphere, and back then I had changed the story's name to Mindscape. It was a creative writing paper, and it was a long paper, like a 50-page, the final exam. And there's about 100 people in my class, and he announced to the class that he felt that someone here could be an author if they did some work with me. Didn't think it would be me. I was like, oh, okay, Then after the class, he called me over and he said, Michael, I want you to stay after school and work in my writing workshop with me. He's like, I really think you have talent. I was kind of blown away, and I accepted it, and I did it for a couple of months with him, and then I left because I had to go make some money. And I remember telling him I had to leave. He said, "Where are you going?" You know, I was like, "Well, I'm going to work in the World Trade Center." You know, at that time is where I was going to work. And I remember him being, he's like, "Oh, you young kids, you waste your talents. You know, you're all going to become doctors and lawyers and accountants, and there needs to be some artists and writers in the world that have talent." I said, "You know, I can't pay my rent." So that's how I started with that. Then I put it aside for a while and started my career. Worked in New York City till about 1999, and met my wife, who's sitting there, Jenna, my wife. Yes. And we started our family. And then when we moved here, and we had a couple of years before my son was born, where I was just kind of working here. The hours are shorter here for what I do as an investment advisor. We get in, back then especially, I was trading more, which I don't do now. But I would get in early, like 5:36, and then I would get out early. And I had the whole afternoon with no kid, and I started writing again. And that's where I did the bulk of this writing. And then I put it down again. And then what had happened at that point is one of my closest friends at the time, Jenna, gave my manual. It was a manuscript, really thick, to one of my close friends. Actually, two of them. One's also sitting here. But first, Jeff Raymond, who happens to be a publicist for Vin Diesel and guys like that. And she said, "This is really good. You should read it." I kind of was doing it for fun. He read it and was like, "You have something here. You know, you shouldn't ignore this." Then eventually Peter Winther is a movie producer that's a close friend of mine. He eventually adapted the screenplay, which got to creative artists, so it grew some legs outside of the book world, and still does have some. But I started writing it, and then through my process of writing, you meet a lot of people. You know, I did clubs with other writers, and you know, I met an agent, and eventually it's difficult to get published. Self-publishing, you know, anybody can do, but to get on a small press, even to get on a big press, it's, you know, besides connections, then there's so many hurdles. You know, my agent had tried unknown author, very difficult. He suggested a small press to me, and Evolved is a great little small press. You should go check out their catalog if you just Google Evolved Publishing. Most of the authors there, I know personally. You know, we have virtual rooms where we're talking, where we discuss how to write and ideas and stuff. It's really a supportive environment. But when I got to them, I remember the day when they accepted my submission. You know, and I'd sent submissions out. You know, you get that. You know, it's a big joke. You get the submission letter, like, you know, sorry, not for us. Sorry, not for us. And all of a sudden, we'd like to. He wanted to have a what do you call it? A chat on the screen with me. And I was like, oh, okay. And then he told me he wanted to do one final edit, which you're going to do when you get to a publisher. That was my favorite part. You know, working with a real editor. You know, you hire editors to help you edit. There's some software you can do, but then when you're working with a publisher's editor, he was excellent. You know, it was like taking a class, a Harvard class in writing, and it took about 6 months, 8 months of going through the revisions and making the book quality. This was the first edition, and then what had happened was this model that we chose got very popular. So the publisher wanted to change the cover. That's what happened to me. She was an unknown model back then. You wouldn't know her in the book world. She's kind of all over the indie world. So the second edition they redid the artwork a little bit and some things like that. The book, you know, so you go through your stages with your book. You know, first stage is it's, you know, all writers are insecure. You know, you never want anybody to read it. You're just kind of doing it by yourself. Doing it for fun, and somebody reads it, and they like it. It makes you really excited, and then, you know, you go through your little steps, and then eventually, if you get to the levels of making it to a publisher, that's exciting. And then they submit it to several indie award companies. The biggest one was Mom's Choice, which is the sticker here. That's Mom's Choice. It won their gold medal for fantasy, and that's kind of a big deal. And I remember that day was kind of, I was like, wow, I guess I could write a little bit. So that's I guess I can probably open it up for questions now. That's just like my journey on writing, and you know, I can tell you what the book's about. Genre-wise, it's kind of falls into sci-fi, which is science fiction fantasy. It's a combination of science fiction and fantasy. The stories that I could probably, it's a little bit more like Hunger Games than anything else. It's about 6 children. The children are, without giving up any plot twist if you're going to read it, but they're on Earth, and they are called to another planet where they have a psychic link to the leaders of that planet, and the leaders are missing. the society is looking for them to help find them. So it's kind of a mystery. And the children, upon coming to this planet, have to, in the end, have to figure things out on their own and find out, what their journey is. And there's some twists in the end as to who they really are and how they got there, and what Earth is and what the sister planet is. The planet there is under siege by an evil entity, and they have to figure out how to defeat this evil entity. The children on Earth are 12. When they go through this mobile portal, they age to 17. And they become more powerful. They have powers they don't know how to use yet, and they have to learn how to use them. So it's a kind of a journey as they get stronger and stronger as the story goes on, and they grow. I'm writing the sequel right now. I'm about halfway done. It's difficult. Liz has me doing so much stuff lately. But having my son is 13. I coach most of his teams here locally. He's a pretty good athlete. So he takes up a lot of my time, and I work. So I'm about halfway done. What I did write is after this, I wrote a prequel. It's called The Cistern Mission. It's only in Kindle format, but if you wanted to see my work and sample it, it's a short story. I don't think it's more than 30 or 40 pages, and it's something that happened before the kids. It's a little bit about that world that they're going to a while before to kind of set the premise. And there's a sample, and there are a few chapters of this book too. So you can look at it. If you go to Amazon, just write my name, Michael Dedich, and my books will come up. Let's see. All right, so I guess I can open it up to questions now. Right? Bruce?
When did you say you kind of started on this story? How old were you? When you were 8. So
I was born in '69. 64 is a little too. I'll get there. Let's get there in time. So it was probably around 70. Honestly, that was right around Star Wars, and it's fun to see I had to buy the tickets 2 months before for Century City to watch Star Wars. He was very, had this reignition of their franchise. That was it for me. Star Wars was amazing when I was 8 years old. So I'm sure that had some influence on me. And then, it's science fiction fantasy is hard to blend. There is a show that I was kind of gave a nice smirk to that just came out. That's good. It's called Into the Badlands. You've seen the new. There's on this planet that they go to. There's a policy. The only weapons that you can, although they have advanced technology, they cannot use weapons of mass destruction, pistols, guns. They can only use ancient, swords and knives, and that's how the science. But they do have science fiction capabilities. Into the Badlands, similar. Although I wrote it first, it's similar that they're banned. That weapons are banned that aren't of ancient, background. Any other questions? Yes. Did you finish, Buzz? Did you finish? Or was
that I think it's fascinating that story has been percolating since you were 8 years old. I mean, that's pretty an amazing thing. And I guess my follow-on question, because we were talking about it beforehand, is as an author, does the story, do you just have a burning story that has to come out, or is it something that seems like, I think I'll write a book and kind of go from there? I mean, what compels you to go through all that effort?
Starting out as an author, it's funny. A lot of the authors on my publisher, a lot of them are stay-at-home. They're a mom or a dad. That's either retired. They're either retired or stay-at-home, so they can write all day. For me, that's difficult.
Right.
So it's in spurts. Now, when I write, this story was in me. Obviously, it kept coming back to me because when I wanted to get an A on this paper in college. That's the story that I'm like, I'm going to write that. I already have 25 handwritten pages, and I needed 50 typed pages, so I work off that. And then somewhere, you always have your muses. My wife's a big muse. She had read the short. She's like, why don't you write? This was great. And you get people that push you at times. You need it. When I write, typically when I was writing in mode, I would write 10 hours, and just get up for normal, get a drink or whatever. But I write in that type of spurt. That's the mode I get into. My wife remembers, I would sit and write and get a ton out in 10 hours. And what I would do normally is I would write a chapter or 10 pages, then I would pace either the neighborhood or we have this pool. I'll just go around the pool and think, to get air into. But when you're in that mode, it's kind of like do not disturb. She knew, my wife knew, my son knew. He's like, don't, Daddy's pacing the pool. Mom, just let him pace the pool.
Right.
It's kind of like what. Everybody has their different ways to do it. Some people write a couple hours a day. Stephen King says write a few hours a day. I can't write a few hours a day. First of all, my schedule, and second of all, it's really not how I write. It's hard to write on a white page. Once you have it down on paper, it's easy to edit. I can tell you that if you write anything. You got to get that out. You got to get that white page out and your thoughts out. And then even if it's not that good, you can fix it, make it better, and keep working at it. That editing I always liked. As I mentioned, I had a great editor I worked at. Really enjoyed working that process because you're learning, and you're not on your own. Somebody's being like, Michael, you're showing here, not telling, or you're telling, not showing. That's a very common struggle with early authors. They tell the story. It was a dark and stormy night. You don't say that line. That's why people rip on that line a lot. So you hear that a lot.
Right.
You got to show the storm. Don't talk. Don't say he wore a black suit. Say it in a different way. As he opened the door, his black suit got caught in the door. You got to show how he looks and not tell the story. And it's more difficult than you think because it'll come through even in small, subtle areas. Even though you might have the big picture done, but things like you have to. If you read the book where I got really, really good in the end, was description. Description of this is a new world. I have to describe this world to you. You've never been there, And it's similar to Earth. It's got might have different colors on different things, but the description is where I really worked heavily with my editor. He said, you got to describe the scene. These people have never been here. They don't know what you're talking about. You might have it in your head. So not to go on a tangent, but more.
Yeah, when you made the comment young people aren't reading, but books like the Harry Potter series,
Yep.
600-700 pages long, and young people reading those. But is that just a subset of the young people, and most aren't? What would you say?
There are, in my opinion, phenomenons like Harry Potter, and there are not many of them. I mean, I bet you most kids saw the movie then read the book still.
No.
Still, even though it did great, and I read all those books and they were great. She tells the story a lot, by the way. When I was younger, there were many authors like that. Anne McCaffrey, who recently passed, was a big author with her Dragon Rider series. There were so many that everybody was reading. I felt like everybody was reading around me at one point. I just peek on my son. Now my son's a little different. He's kind of a jock, a little bit different than I was. But he's only reading with the school to ask him to read. And then I look at his schedule though, and it's different than mine. He's 3 hours a day playing sports and then 2 hours of homework. We had much more free time. Yeah. And then they have PlayStation. They have a lot of distractions. I'm not saying if you put a kid or here, I guess if I was in his world, I'd read less. So I don't think I would have changed how because it kind of built part of me, right? I think that I remember so many times laying on the couch reading a book, so many times after school. And I look at him and he just doesn't do that. But he does other things I didn't do. Yeah. So I don't know if it's, but reading is good. We all know that. The more you read, the more educated you get, and it's better for kids, and the better your vocabulary is, and the better it just transcends everything. I think reading and writing is the most important skill you can learn. Forget everything. Math, great. If you're going to be an engineer, fantastic. You have a calculator. Reading and writing, learning to communicate, you can't get rid of that skill. That skill is going to be important the rest of your life, and in business and personal and everything you do. Yes.
Hi, I have a couple of questions. Is
Sure.
it what is the age range? I know when I was like 12 and 13, The Chronicles of Narnia, I read
Even
all
younger.
of those books.
Yeah,
I
they
loved
were even
those.
younger.
And I was literally a grandmother when they first made the movies
Mhm.
already,
Mhm.
But what is your age range, you think?
It's 12 and higher.
12 and higher?
Young adult. It's
Mhm.
probably similar to the Hunger Games and what's the one movie that just came out now? Peter, what's the sci-fi movie that just came out?
Divergent?
Yeah, Divergent series.
Is
Similar.
there a like a good versus evil? Is
Yes.
there ethics?
Yep.
And,
The kids have to make choices
Mhm.
that are morally good in the end. It's kind of like, do you remember when Edmund ran off with the White Witch.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Mhm.
you know, and then
Candy.
then
Yeah.
if you read the stories later, he you know,
Mhm.
redeems himself.
Mhm.
There's some things like that in here. There is some violence because they're battling on a battlefield, but there is no extensive language or, you know, sexual types, nothing that. It's
Yeah.
a clean story, but there is violence, is the only thing. They are fighting, they're on the battlefield, they are getting into sword fights and fighting some monsters and, you know, trying to get through. And there's a good ending that leaves, it's a cliffhanger for the next book. So, of course, you have one of those.
Michael, how you manage the conflict between your passion and your job?
Difficult. You know, if Peter made the movie, no, I'm just kidding. Peter, anyway. I like what I do. My day job is something, I'm a people person, I like talking to people. That's mostly what I do. I know investments really well, so that comes naturally to me. I read a lot. So it's just, you know, getting in front of people. But, and you know, there's a love-hate with writing. I mean, if you talk to any writer, there is a love-hate with writing. If you're sitting there and it's not coming as easily, it's just, it's work. This was the hardest thing I've done in my life. To finish a book that is, anybody can write anything. Any person could sit and write something and self-publish it now. That's kind of killing the industry, to be honest. There's so much garbage out there on the e-write. You know, you can write a book tonight, not edit it, and put it on Amazon. And it just kind of deludes, you know, it's hard to find your book in that mess. That's why a publisher's good. Small press to big press, they're going to weed out the garbage, you know. So writing something that was good enough to win awards, and I remember the process. You know, my family and my friends, they remember the process. It was the hardest thing I ever did. It was every night. They'd send it back to me. Got to rewrite this. Got to rewrite. It was like that to give and take with the publisher. You know, this has got to be better. We love the story, but you have to make this better. It was constant. It was every night for about a year. After I finished writing my first version, it was every night editing for about a year. Because then I sent it to my independent editor, and then it goes, you know, and then I got a second. Before I sent it to the publishers, I did a second edit. Then it goes to the publisher, and it was an every night thing. You know, it's about, I think, 96,000 words, which is, you know, normal for a sci-fi novel. Young adult books, a lot of them are in the 70,000 word range, so it's a little bit longer, but not. It's fast-paced. I do something a little different in. Some publishers didn't like this. Mine, like the one that chose me, did. I do different points of view. So each chapter is a different, you know, we go around different points. There's 6 kids, and I didn't want it told by just one of the kids. I wanted the other kids to, so you get different perspectives, some of the other characters in the book. So like I said, some publishers like you to have one voice, one point of view. So that's why my book's a little different than a lot of the sci-fi books that you see out there. You're going to get different point of views from the different characters.
Tell George R. R. Martin that, you know.
Yeah.
I think it's probably okay.
Yeah. Well, you know, it's, you know, some people, you know, because you get the critics too. You know, the critics are like, you have too many characters, you have too many this, and I'm like, well, Tolkien did pretty good. It was like
Right.
1 million characters, you know, and several other ones, but they made it. You know, it's hard to break through on what I'm trying to do. That was one of the knocks on it. There's a lot of characters and a lot of stuff going on. But that's how I wrote it. You know, and I wasn't going to change that. And the publisher in the end didn't want me to change that. They just wanted me to, you know, if you have so many characters, it's hard to flesh them all out in the chapters I have. So that's what I work on mostly. You know, we need more from this guy, we need a little more from that guy. It was that type of thing. And certain scenes had to get rewritten. And then Peter came along and he needed a different ending because he wanted to pitch it as a screenplay. So I had to change the whole ending, which, you know, I did before I got to the publisher, so it was okay.
Where do you get your inspiration? Like, who are your favorites, authors? And second question, I have another
Yep.
one too. Are you an e-reader or book? You have
Okay.
to read.
So first question. So obviously C.S. Lewis was probably the first series I read. And I was pretty young. I was like 6 or 7. I think I read those books. They're short, you know, they're really quick. And I think I read The Last Battle like 10 times. You know, I read those books several times. So that was definitely first. Then you get into Anne McCaffrey, who was her Dragon Rider series. Back then, you had Tolkien was, you know, Tolkien was a little bit older. Those are, you know, more in-depth books. I'm trying to think of when I was younger. I mean, I read everything. Though Stephen King's probably one of my favorite authors as I grew older. All of his work. On Writing is a great book. That's the first writing book I read. He has a distinct style, you know, and he's always first person. I'm a third person writer, so he doesn't really help my writing. I just enjoy his stories. Peter Straub. I do like horror and science fiction and mysteries mostly. Grisham's fine, some of his books, but typically I happen to like science fiction and fantasy mostly. E-reader. Okay, so I never really read an ebook till the publisher signed me, and their Evolve Publishing is they do 80% of their sales on ebooks.
Yeah.
And I was like, okay, we're gonna have, when I did my contract, I'm like, so we're gonna have hardcover, and they said, yeah, we're gonna have it, Michael, but we're not gonna promote that as much. So there's not a lot of promotion in that world for them, and they have a budget for each author, they're small. So it's mostly ebooks. So I said, okay, so what I did was, and I was talking with some of the gents here earlier about it, I got the Kindle app, because I have an iPad, I didn't have a Kindle, which I like better, I like the Kindle app better. What I noticed is I read my first book on it, and it actually, after a chapter or two, it comes naturally. Because why? Because we're on the computer all the time. We're reading emails all the time. And you're thinking, I still prefer to read a hardcover. I do. But in the end, it's cheaper. Okay, books are relatively cheaper,
Yeah.
most of them, and they go on sale quicker. You can get them for 99. You can get Game of Thrones for 99 cents sometimes. And it's easier to travel. Okay, if you're going on a weekend trip or a 2-week trip, then you could just you don't need a nightlight. So there are advantages to it. So I mix it up. It depends on what I'm doing. But I probably read over half my books on an e-reader now.
What book are you reading right now?
I'm not reading anything right now because what I usually do is I stock up on the holidays. I usually get gifts of books, and for me, November, December is my busy season for my other job.
Right.
Because this is my year-end tax planning reviewing, so I'm kind of hectic. I told Ruse that because I haven't been around as much. November is really heavy for me, as far as the commerce and Rotary Club and stuff, things I do with him. But then I opened up in January. After January, things quiet down a little, and I'll pick out 3 or 4 books that I want to read, I was reading some of Peter Straub had a short story book. I like short stories sometimes because I don't have the time. So I read his short stories is what I have next to my bed when I want to, sometimes it's good to read 5 or 10 pages before you go to bed because that'll put me to sleep pretty quick. My eyes get pretty heavy.
I was just going to ask, we had an author here, it was, I think, a couple months ago, and he talked about how he really, when he goes to write, he actually does like a full-blown outline, which the thought of doing that before you even write a book never occurred to me, so I guess I didn't listen as well as I should have in English class. But he talked about how, he'd do this whole outline, and then from there, kind of fill in the spaces. Mm-hmm. And I don't know if every author writes that way. Is that your writing style as well, too? And you say, hey, I'm going to map this thing out, and then I'm going to fill in? Or do you just say, hey, I have this story, and I'm just going to start writing?
It's the way I do it is a first act, a second act, and a third act, which is the ending act. And I'll just make notes on a page each about what I want to accomplish in those acts. Mm-hmm. And that changes. It's just a roadmap. Inspiration might inspire you. You might be, you might see something. You might be upstairs at the library. There's something a cover you might see, or something a child does that's kind of, wow, that's. A fight you might see between somebody on the street, a bum that you see that kind of you stop and chat with. I do some weird things like that sometimes. Well, they're not weird, but you get inspiration from things like that. When you're writing, you kind of got to live. You have to go out, kind of explore things a little bit more to feed that creativity because it does help. Anything that you're doing, whether you're on the beach or even at work, a part of using that story when you're writing. It's just like writing an essay about yourself, and you're always looking for inspiration.
Because
all my fellow authors do that. The problem I always have is my schedule. I'm better.
Because it's November, right, and that's a tough month for you, yeah.
November, winter, stuff. Summer's better. I did most of my writing in summer, okay, because it's kind of quiet. All my clients are away. And I was telling a story. Partners at work and stuff like that. They don't get thrilled if they think I'm writing all the time. So I have a little bit of a different line I have to balance. Summers though, usually when I open up, I would like to really finish the sequel by, I hit it hard this summer, spring and summer, getting into June to September. You go to the beach a little less, you do a little less things with the kids, but you have those windows and you go. But the thing is, you know, 80% of that book will be written in a short period of time. And it's like, you know, they talk about progressive education, you know, kids' brains open up at one differently, and when they do though, everything comes through. It's kind of for me like that with writing. When it opens, you gotta take advantage of it, and I can't leave that. I gotta bang, 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 bang. I can't write 2 hours a day. It takes me an hour just to get, you know, have my coffee and write the first few sentences. You know, that's not how I flow. But when I hit that flow, I can write 10 or 20 pages quickly.
My last question, I promise, everyone's looking at me like, hey, I like this stuff. From a marketing perspective, being a marketing guy, did the awards make a big difference in the sales? Or does it take, you know, a certain amount of sales even get noticed by some of these award organizations? You know, how did that play out?
Yeah, no. Short question is, I didn't, Mom's Choice, maybe, you know, because you can see your rankings. I made #1 at points in science fiction teen on Amazon for like a week. And there's promos around that and marketing, and there's a publicist and, you know, all that. So I think I made top 10, but I could only stay there a couple of weeks. You know, you are competing against Divergent. I think I have some screenshots I took though where I was next to like a Divergent, which was
Right.
#1 bestseller for like a day, you know. The awards, I have won 18 awards, and the biggest ones were the Mom's Choice Reader's Favorite. Those were the 2 biggest ones, and then a lot of indie ones, you know, where people, you know, I was probably competing against about 1,000 authors, you know, in each. Mom's Choice maybe a little more, and Reader's Favorite. I did go to Reader's Favorite in Florida for the presentation, so that was kind of cool. They flew us down, and I was in Miami, and I attended it with my wife and son. That was a nice moment, you know, it was a big convention and everything. But the awards don't really, you know, the reviews help a little more. My website got attacked recently, so it's down, but you know, and I have the publishers dealing with it, but they're understaffed. Anyway, but the reviews help, like, you have reviews, let's say a Kirkus or something, that'll help move the needle for a minute. There is no algorithm that they can figure out on what drives a, you know, a sale now. For a small, you know, self-published, who's that self-published guy, that indie guy, Peter, that he wrote it on his own. There's one big guy.
Andy Weir?
No, can't remember his name right. He's self-published, and somehow he cracked it. And he's
the Aragon guy, the kid?
No, well, he self-published, but then got picked up by a publisher.
Right.
It was the guy who wrote Wool.
Yeah, Wool.
I can't think of his name.
Well, this guy Wool self-published and made millions of dollars. You know, multi-millionaire now. That's, you know, that's like a one in a gazillion shot. My publisher, when we talk about marketing opportunities, they don't know what you know, awards should give you credibility, meaning like, hey, this is a quality book. You don't win 17 awards if it's not. It might not be your taste, you might not like the style, it might not be, but it's going to be, at least you see the effort was put into constructing a good story, and the award panelists, you know, you're competing against a lot of other people. So if you're winning that many awards, you know, I was most proud of that.
Right.
You know? But did they move the needle? No, I think I wrote 10 or 15,000 copies I sold.
Interesting. So when you say reviews move the needle, is it reviews from established publication, or is it
Entertainment
reader
Weekly,
reviews? Okay.
which is almost impossible to get into because they're
Yeah.
picking a few books a week out of, you know, they're only going to pick, you know, the publishers. There's, you know, the way I look at it, there's probably some of that old pay to play, you know,
Right.
with the big
Of
houses, you know.
Of course.
The small presses, there are many great small, like I said, my small press is good. I know one thing, if you look at my small press, and they have every genre down. So you might not be a sci-fi person, but if you would check out, you know, they have crime, they have drama, they have erotica even, they have every you know, different subsets there, and they're all gonna be well written and edited. That's what you get from this book would not be as good without the press that chose me. I would have published what I had, it was okay. You need a publisher's editor. It's different than hiring an independent editor. It's just different. You can pay somebody to help edit your book, but with a publisher's editor, they're not appeasing you. You know, you're paying somebody, they're your client, right? And you know, and you're going to argue with them. The writer's going to argue with their editor because you have a vision, and they're going to try to make you see their way. Publisher editor doesn't care. You're going on my press. This is what I want you to do, and you have to do it. In the end, that made the book much better. So I'm glad I didn't self-publish, because for a minute I was like, maybe I'll just put this out as for fun.
Yeah, Hugh Howey was the
Yeah, Hughes, and you know what he did is amazing.
huge,
Yeah. Yes.
is there a level of where you're 100% satisfied, or is there an inner critic where you can always
There's
go
things I
back?
want to change now.
Yeah.
You know, because, you know, when you marry, you know, the good part about this book, so sure, marinated with me for a long time, since I was a kid. And the story wasn't so different. You know, I think I had 7 kids instead of 6 originally. Publishers, I cut out a kid, so I had to cut out a whole character. That was like the first big thing. But it was about 6 children traveling in this parallel world where they had a mission when I was a kid. And then obviously, as you get older, you put some flesh to it and a little bit more depth, and, you know, the plot thickens, so to speak. So, yeah, no, the process is the one thing I did want to say, because you alluded earlier to work. This is work. It's not, there's pleasures, and if you speak to other writers, they'll be lying, because I know them all. I know so many writers now from being in this world, and the forums, I'm in those chat rooms. You know, people are throwing stuff against the wall all the time. It's a lot of work. In the end, it's enjoyable. Yeah, it's a great, the process is great, but it's like I said, probably the hardest work I put into one project. You know, you might have clients, you might have things, but one project to spend, I can't tell you how many hours on this. And the other cool thing with my publishers, if you Google me, go to like YouTube even, the Silver Sphere, they made a bunch of book trailers, the publisher did. And they're kind of cool. Book trailers aren't like movie trailers. The sequel has I had to push back the date on it, but that was a really good book trailer. Actually, that one was pretty advanced. But we did my idea was to do, because there were so many characters, to do character trailers. So there's 4 or 5 of the main characters have their own little quick trailer. A book trailer is kind of just a bunch of images and messages. You know, it's not, you have some moving parts to it, but it's usually just images. That's a good way to, if you wanted to learn about my book, if you went and Googled the Silver Sphere book trailers, or went to YouTube and just put in the Silver Sphere, some trailers will come up, and those are kind of cool to give you an idea of what's going on. And they won't give away too much. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Michael. Meet you. First of all, you referred to Google a few times.
Yep.
I found your date of birth on Google, so it wasn't
Somebody.
my fault, so somebody made a mistake. And it's a time that usually our guests donate one of the
Yes.
copy of one of their book to the library. So please.
Thank you so
Here
much.
you
It
go.
sounds amazing. I'm really excited about it.
And thank you so much again for being here.
Thanks for coming, guys. Thanks for
Thank you very much. 18, he's a freshman in college. He loves science fiction and fantasy. You know, I'm a huge science fiction and fantasy fan, and even my youngest 10-year-old, you know, we found some great stuff.